body should proceed with a policy which it knows is opposed by approximately 3/4 of the people who are going to be affected, and that it knows is opposed by the people to whom its own authority to proceed or not to proceed is about to be handed over. And that really is why what will stop this in the end, and I remain reasonably hopeful that it will be stopped in the end, is the fact that it will be stopped not by the force of scientific argument, not by the force of moral argument, but it will probably be stopped by a legal initiative that causes these people to run out of time. Now, I think it's worth sharing with you, just in the few minutes that I have, some of the relatively recent correspondence that's been going on between some of the actors in this particular drama, because it's quite illustrative of the mindsets of the people involved. Now, Stephen, in September last year, wrote to the Strategic Health Authority, pointing out that Southampton City Council, which had previously taken the view that it was in favour of fluoridation, had changed its mind. And the response came on the 27th of October as follows. South Central Strategic Health Authority is aware that Southampton City Council no longer supports the proposal. This does not affect plans to implement water fluoridation. The board was satisfied that water fluoridation at 1 part per million is a safe and effective way to tackle tooth decay in Southampton, and that the health benefits outweigh all other arguments against fluoridation, including the level of support or opposition. So why then did the law say that they should have to have regard to people's opinions as to whether they wanted it or not? My understanding of the word "have regard for" means that you have to take it properly into account. Evidently, 72% opposition isn't enough for them to take into account, and one has to ask oneself, what would be enough? Would 82% be enough? Would 92% be enough? Would 100% be enough? And the answer to that is clearly no. So therefore, you do rather wonder why it was put in the law in the first place that they should have regard to public opposition, if it exists, when in fact it is absolutely clear that no level of public opposition would be enough for this body to do anything other than proceed with the cause on which it set its heart. I then actually asked the ministers about the matter, and I wrote to Andrew Lansley enclosing a copy of the letter which I've just read to you. And I wrote on 4th of November, and although I wrote to Andrew, I actually got a reply from another minister, Anne Milton, who is the health minister below Andrew, who has specific responsibility in this area. And she said, I can assure you that NHS South Central is complying with the current legislation which was in force in 2008 when the consultation on the fluoridation scheme was conducted. As I'm sure you're aware, the Health and Social Care Bill currently before Parliament provides for responsibility for consultations on fluoridation to transfer to local authorities. The bill includes powers to make new regulations which will include the criteria which local authorities should apply in determining when consultations on the continuance of existing fluoridation schemes should be conducted. So what she was telling me was, they're not breaking the law, but they're not going to be doing this in future. It's going to be the local authorities, and subsequently we'll be able to see when exactly the local authorities are going to be able to decide either to go ahead with this, or even, and this is something that's worth bearing in mind, or even take a decision if they inherit a scheme where water has already been fluoridated, that they might actually decide to stop it and require it to be put into reverse. And that's something that not enough attention has yet been given to. So, and there's not too many more, just 2 more letters. I hope you think it's worth going through this, because I think it's interesting. So I replied to Anne this time. I'd written first to Andrew and got a reply from Anne. This time I replied to Anne and I got a reply from Andrew. So there's a sort of symmetry in that. So I replied to Anne on the 8th of December, and I headed it Fluoridation, an issue of principle. And I said that the point of contacting Andrew had been to confirm something which I'd mentioned previously to him verbally, namely that Southampton City Council had now expressed the view that fluoride should not be added to the city's water supply, bringing it into line with Hampshire County Council, New Forest District Council, David again, and Totton and Ealing Town Council, David again, a triple-hatted presence there, and a very helpful one, as well as the two Labour MPs and one Conservative representing the areas to be affected. And I pointed out that in the case of the two Labour MPs, John Denham and Alan Whitehead, they personally support fluoridation, but rightly, in my view, they believe it should not happen in the face of the current level of public opposition to it. Isn't that interesting? You see, there are people who support fluoridation, but because they are democratic and because they know they have to answer to their electorates, they act accordingly. The Strategic Health Authority is not elected, and you can see where the difference comes in their ability to ignore public opinion. I then said, I've no doubt that it's within the legal powers of the outgoing Strategic Health Authority to force through fluoridation right up to the 59th minute of the 23rd hour of the day on which it is finally abolished, but my point is that such behaviour would be morally indefensible, and I should like you to express a view on this aspect too. This is presumably why it went up to the Secretary of State. Surely you can see that it would be inappropriate and undemocratic to impose a measure in the dying days of the body concerned, when it knows perfectly well that the democratically elected local authorities to which its powers are about to be transferred are opposed to fluoridation proceeding. However much you as an individual and the Department of Health as an organisation may regard fluoridation as a good thing, the issue of principle here is that it should not be imposed by a non-elected body which is about to transfer its powers to do this to other democratically elected bodies which have stated their opposition to the proposal. The question is therefore one of democracy, and I have to differ a little bit, Ashad, here with your view, because there is democracy is central to this question. If we didn't have democracy, we'd have no hope of stopping this, believe me. The question therefore is one of democracy rather than one of technical legality. And I look to you to express a view which recognises that it's not acceptable for the SHA to proceed as it proposes and to override the positions taken against fluoridation by the elected bodies to which its powers are presently to be transferred. So finally, we get the answer from the Secretary of State. I recognise the strength of your continuing concern about this fluoridation scheme. He says it's been the policy of successive governments since the Water Fluoridation Act of 1985 that decisions on fluoridation should be made locally. I thought that's what we were trying to do. Any review of this policy, we would need to take account of existing fluoridation schemes as well as the scheme proposed for Southampton. Subject to enactment of the Health and Social Care Bill, local authorities will become responsible for consultations on both proposals for new fluoridation schemes, and this is the important bit, ladies and gentlemen, and the continuation of existing schemes. So all is not lost, even if they manage to get it in before the deadline. It is at this stage that Southampton City Council should have the opportunity to revisit its policy on fluoridation with little likelihood of any intervention from the department. He says, I do not consider that it would be appropriate to depart from the principles of localism in this matter. Now, I'm not quite sure what localism means. If it means that the SHA is localism, then does that mean the SHA is locally democratic? It certainly isn't that. Does it mean that it's locally representative? It certainly isn't that. Does it even mean that it's locally resident? Well, I think the Echo did rather an effective survey which showed that either one or none of the members of the authority were actually living in areas that were going to be affected by fluoridation. But to conclude, I just want to say this. There is no morally defensible case in a democratic society for an undemocratic body to impose something against the will of the people, against the will of the local authorities, against the will of the elected parliamentarians, against the will even of those elected parliamentarians who would like to see it happen, but who have enough respect for democracy to say that it shouldn't happen until the people want it. There really is no moral basis to do that when the body itself is about to be abolished and its powers handed over to other bodies that have clearly expressed a view against fluoridation. So my message to you is, please be active, please keep your pressure up, please use the postcard campaign, but bear in mind, first of all, there is every prospect that this matter will be delayed long enough to see off the SHA. And even in extremis, even if they manage to get it in just before they're eliminated themselves, there's no necessary reason why the scheme can't be reversed after that. Thank you very much for listening.